The lights were still glowing when the betrayal began. In the center of a glittering engagement hall in Kano, Amara Suleiman stood beneath the chandeliers, her engagement ring shining as guests smiled, laughed, and raised their glasses around her. Everything looked perfect, until Danjuma Bello took the microphone. "Everyone," he said calmly, "there has been a small change." The room fell silent. Then, before Amara could even breathe, Danjuma reached for her sister's hand and pulled Zara to his side. "The woman I will be marrying," he said, his voice clear and cold, "is Zara." Gasps ripped through the hall. A glass shattered somewhere in the crowd. Phones rose instantly. Someone laughed. Amara didn't move. She stood frozen beneath the lights, her world collapsing in complete silence, while her own sister smiled in a gold dress beside the man who had just destroyed her. Then her mother leaned close and whispered in her ear, "Don't embarrass this family, Amara." That was the moment something inside her broke. And near the doorway, dressed in simple clothes, stood a quiet man no one had noticed. His name was Emeka Eze. Nobody in that room thought he mattered. That was their first mistake. But what happened next in that hall changed everything. If you love powerful stories of betrayal, justice, and unexpected destiny, subscribe now, because Amara's story was far from over. And before we continue, tell me in the comments, if this happened to you, would you walk away or fight back?
Amara Suleiman had learned early that dignity was not something the world gave you. It was something you protected, quietly, daily, even when no one was watching. She was 26 years old, the eldest daughter in a family that lived on the edges of Kano's middle class, not poor enough to be invisible, not wealthy enough to be safe. Their home in the Nasarawa GRA district was modest, 3 bedrooms, a small yard with a mango tree that dropped fruit every August, and walls that needed painting every 2 years but never quite got it. Amara woke before her family most mornings. She made tea, she checked her planner, she left for work by 7:15. She worked as a procurement officer for a construction supply company near Bompai Road, managing supplier contracts, vendor negotiations, and the endless paperwork that kept large projects moving. It was not glamorous work, but she was precise, she was reliable, and over 4 years she had become the kind of employee that managers quietly depended on while publicly underpaying. Her salary was enough. Barely. She paid her portion of the household expenses, sent money to her father's younger brother in Zaria, who had taken in 2 of her cousins after their parents passed, and still managed to save a small amount each month in an envelope she kept inside a book of Quranic verses on her bedroom shelf. She didn't spend money on appearance. She didn't chase social events. What she had was discipline, and discipline, she had always believed, would eventually become something solid. Her mother, Hajia Ramatu, saw things differently. Hajia Ramatu was a woman shaped by a single belief, that a family's survival depended on its reputation. In Kano, she said often, people did not remember your struggles, they remembered your name and what they said beside it. She had 2 daughters, Amara, the eldest, who worked hard and spoke carefully, and Zara, the younger, who laughed easily and moved through rooms like she owned them. Zara was 24. She had her mother's confidence and her late father's charm, where Amara was still water, deep, reliable, quiet. Zara was current, always moving, always pulling things toward herself. Between the sisters, on the surface, there had always been love, but love between sisters and a family with limited resources sometimes contained invisible competition, a competition neither of them ever formally declared, but both could feel pressing at the walls of every shared room. It was Amara who first met Danjuma Bello. He appeared at her office one afternoon in March when a delivery of steel reinforcement rods for one of his construction projects was held up at the depot. Most clients who faced delays became hostile immediately. Calls at all hours, threats to cancel contracts, demands to speak with directors. Danjuma walked in and asked politely, "Who manages this account?" Amara stepped forward. "I do." He looked at her, not the way many wealthy men looked at women, scanning for weakness or beauty to exploit, but directly, like he was trying to understand something. "Then fix it, please. I trust you can." She fixed it within the day. After that, he returned, not always for business. Sometimes he appeared in the late afternoon when the office was quieter, asking questions that had nothing to do with procurement schedules. He asked about her family, about where she had studied, about whether she ever left Kano. He listened when she answered, completely, without his eyes drifting to his phone. For a woman who had spent years being efficient and unnoticed, being listened to felt startling. When he asked her out, there was no drama, no performance. He said simply, "I would like to know you outside of work if you're willing." She said yes. Their first dinner was at a quiet restaurant in Nasarawa where the tables were spaced far enough apart for real conversation. Amara wore a simple Ankara blouse and felt underdressed compared to the other women in the restaurant, but Danjuma spoke to her like the clothes were irrelevant, and somehow that made her believe, just briefly, that maybe they were. Over the months that followed, something grew between them, careful at first, then warmer. He visited their family compound. He greeted her mother with the right words and the right timing. He sat with her uncle and spoke about the city with the easy authority of a man who had built things in it. Hajiya Ramatsu blowed that evening. After Danjuma left, she called her to her room and took both her hands. "This is our time. Don't do anything to spoil it." Amara heard the warning beneath the blessing. 3 months later, Danjuma proposed. He did it simply, in his car parked near the Tiga Lake on a quiet evening, a small box held between both hands. "I want to build something real, with you." Amara held the moment in her chest before answering. She thought about her father, who had died when she was 20, leaving behind unpaid hospital bills and a family that had to rearrange itself around his absence. She thought about her mother's constant anxiety, her sister's hunger for something larger. She thought about 4 years of being reliable and overlooked, and she said, yes. The celebration at home was louder than the proposal. Zara hugged her first, laughing brightly. "My sister will be Madame Bello. We are moving up." But when Amara looked into Zara's eyes, she saw something beneath the laughter that she could not name. It wasn't joy. It was the expression of someone who had just learned the location of something they wanted. Amara told herself she was imagining things. She was wrong.
Engagement preparations moved quickly. Danjuma wanted a large celebration, a statement, he said, for his family and business circle. The venue was booked at one of Kano's most recognized event spaces in the Sabangari district. Printed invitations went to 200 guests. Amara did not love large ceremonies, but she understood Danjuma's world required visibility, and she accepted it. What she did not accept easily was the growing unease she felt as the date approached. In the week before the engagement party, Danjuma became harder to reach. Calls that once connected on the first ring now went to voicemail. Messages were answered hours later with short replies. When she asked if something was wrong, he said only, "Business pressure, don't worry." Zara, by contrast, was suddenly everywhere. She volunteered to accompany Amara for outfit fittings. She photographed everything and posted it online, captions that somehow always centered on herself. One evening, Amara came home early and found Zara in the corridor, speaking quietly on her phone. When she heard Amara's footsteps, Zara ended the call and turned with a smile that arrived too fast. "Who were you talking to?" Amara asked. "A friend," Zara said. "Which friend?" Zara tilted her head. Amara, relax. Your wedding is almost here. Enjoy it. That night, Amara lay in bed unable to sleep. Her phone buzzed. A message from Danjuma. We'll talk tomorrow. Everything will be fine. No term of endearment, no warmth. Amara set the phone face down on the mattress and pressed her eyes shut. It will be fine, she whispered, but the part of her that survived hard years didn't believe it. The engagement hall in Sabangare was the kind of space Amara had seen in other people's photographs, but never stood inside herself. Crystal light fittings, white tablecloths, waiters in black and gold uniforms moving between guests with practiced invisibility. When Amara walked in, the room shifted the way rooms do when someone enters who doesn't yet know they're about to become the story. She found her mother first. Hajia Ramatu stood near the entrance to the main hall, wearing a deep purple bubu, her posture straight and proud. You look beautiful. Come greet the elders. Where's Danjuma? Amara asked. With his people. Men talk. Come. Then she saw Zara. Her sister stood near the stage at the front of the hall, wearing a deep gold dress that shimmered when she moved. Her makeup was flawless. Her posture was relaxed, too relaxed, in the way of someone who already knew what was coming. When their eyes met, Zara raised her hand and waved. Amara walked toward her. You look different tonight, Amara said carefully. Different how? I don't know. Confident. Tonight is important. Before she could respond, the DJ faded the music down, and the MC stepped forward with a cordless microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us tonight to celebrate the engagement of Danjuma Bello and Amara Suleiman. Applause. Amara's heart fluttered. She looked toward the back of the room.
Danjuma appeared. He walked from the side entrance in a charcoal kaftan, unhurried, every step certain. He did not look for Amara's eyes as he crossed the floor. He took the microphone. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here. His voice was completely calm. The room quieted. Amara watched his face across the space between them, and in that moment she understood, the way the body understands things before the mind catches up, that something was wrong. Tonight was meant to be a celebration, and it still is, but there has been a small change. The room didn't react. People assumed he was about to announce a wedding date, a venue, a surprise. The woman I will be marrying, he paused. Then he looked sideways, is Zara. The silence lasted exactly 2 seconds. Then the room exploded. Gasps, whispers. A woman near the front table dropped her glass, and the sound of it shattering was the only honest thing in the room. Phones appeared in every hand. Someone in the back laughed, a short, confused sound, and then other laughter followed, because humans laugh when they don't know what else to do. On stage, Zara moved to Danjuma's side, as if she had rehearsed it. Her gold dress caught every light in the room. Her hand found his arm. She smiled. Amara did not move. She stood in the middle of that hall, surrounded by 200 people, and she did not move. She did not cry. She did not speak. She simply stood while the world rearranged itself into something unrecognizable. Her mother appeared at her side. Amara, don't embarrass this family. Something cracked, silently, in the center of Amara's chest. Not her strength, not her dignity, something else. The last soft place where she had still believed that the people who claimed to love her would choose her when the choice was hard. Danjuma spoke again into the microphone. Zara understands my world. She understands what is required. I hope everyone will celebrate with us. More applause, uncertain at first, then building, because crowds follow permission, and the man with the microphone had given it.
Amara turned and walked. She didn't run, she didn't shout. She moved through the room with the same quiet steadiness that had always been her nature, because the only thing left that was entirely hers was how she carried herself out of a room that had just watched her be erased. When she reached the glass doors, the night air of Kano hit her face. Behind her, through the glass, she could see the silhouettes of guests already returning to conversations, glasses being refilled, the event continuing as if nothing had broken. Her hands were shaking. She pressed them together and looked at the dark street below. "Excuse me." A voice, quiet and unhurried. Amara turned. A man stood a few steps away. He wore simple clothes, a plain cotton top, dark trousers, worn sandals. He looked like someone who worked the land, or fixed things with his hands, or moved through life without needing anyone to notice him. His face was calm.
He held a small bottle of water. "Take this," he said. "I'm fine." "You're not." She took the water. The man didn't stare. He didn't ask what had happened. He simply stood nearby, giving her the kind of space that said, "I see you, and I won't make it worse." After a moment, she said, "Thank you." He nodded once. Inside the hall, music resumed. Laughter drifted through the glass. The man spoke quietly. "People show you exactly who they are when they believe no one important is watching." "Who are you?" Amara asked. A small, unhurried smile crossed his face. "My name is Emeka Eze." The name meant nothing to her. He was just a stranger, a quiet, unremarkable stranger who had offered her water while everyone else raised a glass to her humiliation. But standing there on those steps in Kano, with the broken pieces of her life still settling around her, Amara Suleiman had no way of knowing that the quiet man beside her owned more of this city's farmland, processing facilities, and agricultural investments than Danjuma Bello would ever build in his lifetime. She didn't know that yet. Nobody did. And that, as it turned out, was exactly how Emeka had planned it. The morning after the engagement party arrived too quickly. Amara woke with swollen eyes and the particular heaviness that follows emotional devastation, the kind of exhaustion that sleep cannot fix because it lives in the chest, not the body. For a moment, staring at the ceiling of her small bedroom, she wondered if the night before had been a dream. Then her phone buzzed once, twice, 5 times in rapid succession. Her social media notifications had exploded overnight. Photos from the engagement hall were already circulating. Danjuma and Zara on the stage, her sister's gold dress catching the light, both of them smiling while applause filled the room. One photo had already been shared over 300 times. The caption beneath the most popular post read, "Kano businessman Danjuma Bello announces surprise engagement to Zara Suleiman at glamorous celebration." The comments were worse. Wait, wasn't he engaged to her sister? The older one wasn't good enough, apparently. This family drama? Wow. Classic Kano story. Amara set the phone face down on the mattress. Her phone rang. "Mama." "Where did you go last night?" Hajia Ramatu's voice was sharp, clipped. No greeting, no softness. "You told me to leave quietly." "Yes, but you disappeared without greeting the elders properly. People noticed." Amara closed her eyes. "Mama, Danjuma announced he was marrying Zara." "Yes." The single word dropped like a stone into still water. "You say it like it is nothing. These things happen. Men make choices. She is my sister, and she will still be your sister after the wedding. That is what matters." Amara felt something cold move through her chest. "You knew." A pause, not the pause of someone searching for words,
the pause of someone deciding how much truth to release. I knew there were conversations between Danjuma and Zara. I thought it was nothing. And when you realized it wasn't nothing? A man like Danjuma does not come twice. If he chose Zara, then this family still benefits. That is not betrayal. That is survival. Amara sat very still on the edge of the bed. She had heard her mother say difficult things before, but this was her mother choosing the shape of the family's prosperity over the shape of her daughter's dignity, and doing it without flinching. I have to go. Come to the compound later. Zara wants to speak to you. I'll think about it. She ended the call before her mother could respond. For a long time, she sat without moving. Outside, the neighborhood was already alive. Bread sellers pushing carts, a mosque loudspeaker finishing the last notes of Fajr recitation, children running somewhere with too much energy for the early hour. Eventually, Amara stood. She splashed cold water on her face and looked at herself in the bathroom mirror. Her eyes were red, her jaw was set. And beneath the exhaustion, something else was quietly forming, not yet fully shaped, but present, the earliest outline of a decision. She would not disappear. 3 days later, Amara arrived at her office to find the atmosphere changed. It was subtle, the kind of shift that has no single source, just a general reorientation of how people stand when you enter a room. Her supervisor, Mr. Tonko, appeared at her desk at 10 in the morning and asked her quietly to come to his office. You know, our company has relations with several major clients. Yes. Danjuma Bello contacted our director yesterday. The room became very quiet. He suggested that your continued presence here might create complications for the business relationship. Amara listened to the complete silence inside herself. He wants me removed. He didn't confirm it. He didn't need to. The directors feel it would be best if you took some time away, a few months. A few months is a polite way to say do not come back. He said nothing. Amara stirred slowly. I understand. We'll pay an additional month's salary. Thank you. She walked out of the office before the tears could arrive. Outside on Bompai Road, the midday heat pressed down from a white sky. She walked without direction for a while, letting the noise of the city fill the space where her thoughts were too sharp to be useful.
In 4 days, she had lost her fiancé, her reputation, and her job, all because Danjuma Bello had decided she was inconvenient. She stopped at a street corner and pressed her palm flat against the wall beside her. He thinks he can erase me, she thought. The coldness in her chest sharpened into something more focused. He is wrong. The man at the roadside. By late afternoon, Amara's fate had carried her across half of Kano without plan or destination. She had visited 4 offices asking about open positions. Each time the person at the reception had taken her name with a smile and said they would be in touch. Their eyes said something different. Eventually, she found herself near a small roadside cafe on the edge of Fage district. She sat down and ordered tea. And then she looked up and saw Emeka Eze sitting 2 tables away. You look tired, he said. I lost my job today. He absorbed this without theatrics. Danjuma? He called my company. He nodded slowly. He gestured for her to join him. They didn't speak immediately. The street moved around them. Okada riders weaving between traffic, a woman arguing cheerfully with a fruit seller, a group of school children spilling off a bus. After a while, Amara said, You were at that event. You saw everything. Yes. And you're still sitting here talking to me? Why wouldn't I be? She looked at him. There was something in him that she could not categorize, a stillness that didn't feel like shyness or disinterest,
but like someone who had learned through some experience she couldn't read to be very comfortable with silence. "What were you doing at that event?" "Delivering documents for someone inside." "What kind of documents?" "Business paperwork." She waited for more. He didn't offer it. "You're not very forthcoming. You are not very careful about asking strangers personal questions." "I'm having the worst week of my life. I've stopped filtering." He looked at her directly. "What will you do now?" "I don't know. Find another job. Start again." "Start tomorrow, and start early. The people worth working for fill their positions before 10 in the morning." That's oddly precise advice. "I've hired people," he said simply. "For deliveries?" He smiled at the table. "Among other things." They sat until the evening call to prayer sounded from the mosque 2 streets away. Then Amara gathered herself and stood. "Thank you for the water last night and the table today. Come back tomorrow if the search goes badly. The tea helps." She almost smiled. She almost did.
In Kano, gossip had its own geography. It began in houses and compounds, then moved through markets and offices, then reached WhatsApp groups and Facebook pages, and by the time it arrived at the city's larger social circles, the original truth had already been replaced by something more convenient and more cruel. By the end of the first week after the engagement party, the version of Amara's story that most people repeated had very little to do with what actually happened. Some said Amara had done something to lose Danjuma's trust. Others said she had been too proud. A few versions suggested that Zara had simply been the better woman all along. Nobody in any of these versions asked what Zara had done. Nobody asked what Danjuma had done. They asked only what Amara had failed to do. She knew this. She had grown up in this city. She understood how its judgments worked. The job search was slow and discouraging. Wherever she applied, procurement, logistics coordination, supply chain management, the spaces felt warm until they weren't. She was well qualified, she had references, but Kono's professional world was not large, and Danjuma Bello's name moved through it efficiently. Doors didn't slam, they simply failed to open. On the 5th day of searching, she returned to the roadside cafe in Fage. Emeka was there. "Still looking?" he asked. "Still being looked around," she said. He poured her tea. She had begun to notice that he came here often, that he came here every morning, that he had his own arrangement with the woman who ran the place, which meant he was not a transient visitor, but someone with a routine. "What do you actually do all day?" she said. "Today, I visited 2 farms north of the city." "You're a farmer?" "Among other things." "You keep saying that. It keeps being true." Amara looked at him with the frank assessment she had stopped applying in most social situations because it made people uncomfortable. Emeka didn't appear uncomfortable. He met her look calmly, waiting. "You know things about business that farmers don't usually know. Some farmers read. You talk about contracts and legal structures like someone who has negotiated them. Some farmers have lawyers. You're enjoying this." A genuine smile appeared on his face. "A little," he admitted. Amara looked away, out at the street. A thought had been forming for days, quietly. "I want to start something of my own, small, logistics coordination for local suppliers. I know the work, I know the gaps in how smaller businesses in this city move goods. There's a real need and nobody is filling it cleanly." She waited for him to be politely dismissive. It was what people did when women in difficult circumstances announced plans. They nodded carefully and changed the subject. Emeka didn't nod carefully. He leaned forward slightly. "Tell me more," he said. And so she did. For the next hour, she described what she had seen in 4 years of procurement work. The small construction suppliers who lost money because their schedules were chaotic. The market distributors who overpaid middlemen because they lacked formal coordination. The importers at Yankura Market who needed reliable ground logistics but couldn't afford the large companies. Emeka listened the way he always listened, completely, without performing attention.
When she finished, he asked 3 questions, sharp, specific questions that revealed an understanding of supply chains that had nothing to do with farming. She stared at him. "You know this industry," she said. "I know most industries a little. Why are you sitting in a roadside cafe in Fage?" He looked at his tea. "Because the bread is good." "Emeka." He looked up. Something shifted in his expression, not quite revelation, but the beginning of it, as though he was measuring something. "Start your business," he said. "I know someone who has a small warehouse space near Kofar Wambai that he's not using fully. The rent is reasonable. I'll introduce you." "Why would you do that?" "Because you have a clear plan, and most people with clear plans can't find the first door. Consider it a door." "I don't take charity," she said carefully. "It's not charity, it's an introduction. What you do with it is yours entirely." She studied him. Then, "All right," she said. The space near Kofar Wambai was modest, a single-floor building with a loading area, a small office in the back, and walls that smelled of old grain and motor oil. The owner, a heavy-set man named Malam Garba, shook Amara's hand with the grip of someone who had been lifting things his whole life. "Malam Garba says you are serious." "I am," she replied. "Then we will see." The rent agreement was simple and fair. Amara spent the first week cleaning, organizing, and drawing up a basic operating structure. She contacted 3 small suppliers she had worked with previously. 2 agreed to try. The third said he'd heard things. "What things?" she asked calmly. "People say you had a problem with Danjuma Bello." "I had a broken engagement," she said calmly, "not a criminal record." Another pause. "I'll give you 2 months. If the schedules hold, we continue." "They'll hold," she said. And she was right. By the end of the first month, the warehouse had 4 clients. By the end of the second, it had 7. Deliveries left on time. Invoices were accurate. The drivers she hired learned quickly that she expected precision and rewarded it with reliability. Word moved quietly through the small business networks near Kofar Wambai. A woman running a logistics operation out of the warehouse on Zungaru Road. Clean, consistent, affordable.
Malam Garba stopped in one evening to find the loading area more organized than he had seen it in years. "You've changed this place," he said. "I just organized what was already here," Amara replied. Meanwhile, Emeka appeared regularly, not as an overseer, not as an investor demanding returns, but in the way of someone who happened to pass through and happened to ask how things were going. He helped her review a supplier contract one evening at the small desk in the back office. "You think like an operations director," he said after she finished. "I was an operations assistant," she said. "That's not the same thing." She looked up. Something passed between them, not a declaration, just a recognition. 2 people acknowledging, without saying it directly, that they had each been given a smaller title than their capacity deserved. She noticed things about him in those weeks, the phone calls he stepped away to take, the way he referenced legal structures with a specificity that came from experience, not reading. The leather folder she saw once, briefly, on the seat of his car, thick with documents, printed on the kind of paper that expensive legal firms used. She filed these observations quietly. She trusted him, but trust did not require the absence of questions. "You'll tell me eventually," she said one evening, not looking up from the delivery schedule she was marking. "Tell me what?" he asked. "Who you actually are." A silence. "Yes," he said, simply. "I will." 6 weeks after Amara opened the warehouse, something shifted in the relationship between Amara and Emeka that neither of them addressed directly. It happened gradually, the way significant things often do, through accumulation rather than event. An evening reviewing delivery manifests that stretched past 9 o'clock because neither of them moved to leave. A cup of tea that became 2, then a walk along Gidan Makama Road while the evening dust softened the city's edges. A question asked without guarding, an answer given without measuring. They disagreed about things, which helped. Emeka believed that small businesses should grow slowly and resist the temptation of expansion before their systems were stable.
Amara believed that the right moment for growth was often shorter than cautious people admitted. "You'll overextend," he said one evening. "You'd be comfortable at half my current size. I'd be bored." "Boredom is underrated," he said. Says the man who apparently visits farms and attends business events and delivers legal documents and still has time for roadside tea every morning. He smiled into his cup. She watched him smile. She had begun to notice in quiet moments she didn't examine too carefully that she looked for that smile, that the warehouse somehow felt better organized on the days he stopped in than on the days he didn't. This was information she filed carefully and did not act on, until one evening when he made it unnecessary for her to decide. They were sitting on the low wall outside the warehouse after locking up for the night. The sky over Kano was the particular deep blue that appeared for 20 minutes between sunset and full dark, a color that made the minarets across the city look like they had been drawn in ink. Emeka said, "Marry me." No preamble, no performance, just that. Amara turned to look at him. "That's not funny." "I'm not trying to be funny." She studied his face in the blue light. He was completely calm, not nervous, not performing confidence to cover nervousness, genuinely, simply calm. "Emeka, we know each other for less than 2 months." "I know. My engagement to another man collapsed 8 weeks ago in front of 200 people. I was there. This is—" She stopped. "People are already saying things about you. None of them have improved your situation so far." She looked at the sky. Then, "Is this not pity?" she asked. "I don't pity you." "What is it then?" He looked at her directly. "Respect, and the belief that you deserve a partner who stands beside you, not above you." She was quiet for a long time. The city settled around them. A motorcycle passed. Somewhere a baby cried briefly and then stopped. "I don't know your whole story," she said finally. "No. There are things you haven't told me." "Yes." "That should bother me more than it does." "Perhaps, but you're a good reader of character, and you've been reading mine for 8 weeks." She had been, and what she had read was this: a man who did not use kindness as a transaction, who did not offer help as a way to accumulate obligation, who told the truth when asked, even if he didn't volunteer it, and who never, once, not once, looked at her like someone who was to be managed. "If we do this," she said, slowly, "it will be small, no performance, no stage." "Agreed." "And honest. Whatever you haven't told me, eventually you tell me." "I will." "And equal. What I build. It isn't yours because we're married." "I wouldn't want it any other way." She looked at him for another long moment. Then she said, "Okay." He blinked, very slightly, very briefly, as though he had been more uncertain than he appeared. "Are you sure?" "No," she said honestly, "but I'm willing."
Danjuma Bello did not like loose ends. In business, he had built his reputation on the same principle that governed his personal life: control the narrative before someone else does. He made decisions quickly, executed them cleanly, and moved forward without looking back. Amara had been meant to be a clean cut. She was supposed to absorb the humiliation quietly, disappear into the city's background noise, and eventually surface in a smaller version of the life she had planned, manageable, diminished, forgotten. That was not what had happened. Instead, word had reached him through 3 separate channels that a woman running a small logistics coordination operation near Kofar Wambai was gaining traction among local suppliers, that her delivery schedules were clean, that her client list was growing, that the woman was Amara Suleiman. Amara Edze, now, his contact corrected. She married? Yes, about a month ago. A man named Emeka Edze. No major profile, small scale, probably agricultural. Danjuma had laughed. Then he had instructed his investigator to keep watching. It came on a Wednesday morning. 2 men in suits arrived at the warehouse just before 10 o'clock. They carried matching folders. They introduced themselves as representatives of Bello Integrated Holdings, Danjuma's parent company. Malam Garba brought them to Amara's back office with the expression of someone who suspects a problem without knowing its exact shape. Amara looked up at her delivery manifest. "Madame Edze, we are here regarding a contractual concern." "Sit down," she said. They didn't sit. The second man opened his folder and placed documents on the desk. "Our client believes certain operational structures currently being used by this enterprise were originally developed under contract for Bello Integrated Holdings, specifically during your previous employment." Amara looked at the papers slowly. "You're claiming I stole a logistics system. Our client believes there may be proprietary overlap. I built this operation from scratch, using my own experience and industry-standard knowledge." The first man nodded as though he found her response interesting but not relevant. "If the current system continues to operate in its present form, our client reserves the right to pursue legal remedy. You have 7 days to respond formally." They collected their folders and left. The warehouse was quiet. Malam Garba looked at Amara. "Can they do this?" She stared at the door they had exited through. "Legally, the claim is almost certainly weak, but legal processes aren't only about law, they're about resources, and right now, Danjuma has more of those than we do." Garba sat down heavily. "I can't fight this." "I know. So we have to be smarter than a fight." That evening, she laid the documents out on their kitchen table. Emeka sat across from her and read everything. All of it, every page. He turned documents over and examined the footnotes. He read the legal language with the focus of someone for whom legal language was not a foreign country. When he finished, he placed the papers in a neat stack. "This is weak. I know it's weak. They know it's weak. It doesn't matter if it gets expensive."
Mm-hmm.
He looked at the ceiling for a moment, thinking. "Did you sign any intellectual property agreement during your employment with Danjuma's company?" "No." "Any clause assigning your work product to the company?" "No." "Did you use any proprietary software or templated systems that belong to them?" "No, I used general procurement software and industry-standard logistics frameworks." He nodded slowly. "Then the claim has nothing to stand on beyond intimidation. Do you have records before you worked with Danjuma, anything showing you understood these systems independently?" She thought. "My university dissertation was in supply chain management. I have old notebooks from my first job, before Bello, and I have emails from suppliers I advised informally years before I joined his company." "Get all of it. Bring it here." She looked at him. "Emeka, you keep speaking about this like someone who has handled legal situations before." "I have." "For your farm?" He looked at her directly. The measuring expression she had seen before appeared again. "Not only for the farm." "Then for what?" A pause. "Let me respond to the legal notice first, and then I'll explain everything. I promise you that order for a reason." She studied him. "All right, but Emeka, after the letter goes, you tell me. Not soon. After." "After," he agreed.
Over the next 3 days, Amara gathered everything. Old notebooks, university papers, emails dating back 7 years, informal consultancy records from before she ever heard the name Danjuma Bello. Emeka organized everything with methodical precision. He drafted the response letter himself. She watched him write it. The language he used was not the language of someone who had looked up legal terminology online. It was the language of someone who had sat across from lawyers in formal settings and understood exactly which pressure points mattered in exactly which order. The letter did 4 things. First, it provided documented evidence that Amara's operational knowledge predated her employment with Bello Integrated Holdings by 6 years. Second, it cited 3 specific legal precedents regarding the misuse of intellectual property claims as retaliatory business interference. Third, it documented a pattern: the investigator who had appeared at the warehouse, the canceled contract references, and now the legal notice as evidence of coordinated harassment rather than genuine legal concern. Fourth, it included a signature line at the bottom: Emeka Eze, Executive Director, Eze Agricultural and Logistics Holdings. Amara read the letter twice. Then she looked up at him. Emeka. Yes. What is Eze Agricultural and Logistics Holdings? My company. How large is your company? He was quiet for a moment. Large enough that Danjuma Bello's legal team will recognize the name. Amara sat very still. How large, she said again, is large enough? He met her eyes. Come to the farm with me tomorrow. I'll show you. The farm was not what Amara expected. She had imagined a modest plot of land somewhere north of the city, a few acres, workers with hoes, the kind of operation that a hard-working man built slowly over years and described with quiet pride. What Emeka drove her to, 40 minutes north of Kano on the Katsina Road, was something else entirely. The gates appeared first, wide iron gates set into a stone wall, with a security booth and 2 guards who straightened immediately when they recognized the approaching vehicle. Beyond the gates, the property stretched further than she could see, rows of crops organized with the precision of engineering, irrigation channels running parallel to the planting lines like veins in a leaf. Several large warehouse structures at the far edge of the property, their corrugated roofs shining silver in the morning light. Workers moved across the field in organized groups. A man with a clipboard met them at the entrance and gave Emeka a brief report in the matter-of-fact tone of someone delivering information to a person whose time is valuable. Amara walked beside Emeka in silence. They passed a processing facility, machinery for grain cleaning, packaging equipment, cold storage units. They could see trucks being loaded at the far dock, marked with a company name she now recognized from the letter she had read 2 days before: Eze Agricultural and Logistics Holdings. She stopped walking. How many employees? She asked. On this property, about 240. Across all operations, closer to 800. She looked at him. All operations. There were 4 other farms, 2 processing centers in Kaduna and Zaria, and a logistics network that handles ground transport for agricultural goods across 7 northern states. The morning air felt very still. Yet you were sitting in a roadside cafe in Fage. I like the bread. Emeka. He stopped walking. He turned to face her fully, and for the first time since she had known him, he looked like someone preparing to be genuinely known. 10 years ago, he said, I inherited a single farm from my father. It was in debt, the equipment was old, 3 employees. What happened? I worked, and I made good decisions, and I found people who were better at me at certain things, and I paid them well and listened to them. And it became this? Over time, yes. She looked across the organized rows of crops, the moving workers, the distant loading docks. Why did you hide it? He was quiet for a moment. Because when people know you have resources, they relate to the resources, not to you. I've had business partners who became partners for the wrong reasons. I've had people present themselves as something they weren't because they wanted access to what I'd built. And so you test people? I observe people. There is a difference. A test has a designed outcome. Observation just watches. What did you observe about me? He looked at her steadily. When everything was taken from you, you didn't reach for the first available rescue. You reached for your own capability. She held his gaze. "I'm angry," she said quietly. "I know. You should have told me before we married. Yes, I should have told you before I proposed. Why didn't you?" He looked away briefly, toward the fields. "Because I was afraid that if I told you, you would say yes for the wrong reasons, or say no because you didn't want to be perceived as marrying into wealth after losing a wealthy man." She hadn't thought of that. She thought of it now. She thought about what it would have looked like. Amara Suleiman, publicly humiliated at a rich man's engagement party, marrying another rich man 6 weeks later. What Kano would have said. What even she might have wondered about her own motives. "That's frustratingly reasonable. Are you still angry?" "Yes, but I understand the reasoning. I understand the reasoning." I exhaled slowly. "You still should have told me." "I agree. If you keep things from me again—" "I won't. You have my word." She looked at him for another long moment in the bright northern morning. Then she turned and looked at the farm again. All of it, the full scale of it, stretching out in organized abundance under the Kano sky. "This is remarkable," she said quietly. "Thank you." "Don't thank me, it's an observation. A similar observation. To yours." He laughed, a real laugh, full and unguarded, the kind she had never heard from him before. She felt something loosen in her chest, not all of the anger, but enough.
Across the city, inside a glass and steel office tower near Independence Way, Danjuma Bello sat behind his polished desk while his legal advisor read the response letter aloud. Halfway through the second page, the lawyer's voice slowed. By the third page, he stopped entirely. "Read it," Danjuma said. The lawyer placed the document on the desk and turned it toward him, pointing to the signature line. Danjuma read the name. Emeka Eze, Executive Director, Eze Agricultural and Logistics Holdings. He read it again. "Is this the same—" "I ran the name," his lawyer said. Eze Agricultural and Logistics Holdings controls the largest private agricultural processing network in the Northwest. They hold distribution agreements with 3 state governments and ground logistics contracts for grain transport across 7 states. "I know what that means," Danjuma said quietly. The lawyer placed a second document beside the first, a printed corporate registry page. At the top, a company photograph, and beside the founder's name, a headshot. The same quiet face that had stood near the doorway at the engagement party, the man everyone had looked past. Danjuma sat back in his chair. Outside his window, Kano's skyline moved through its ordinary afternoon. "He married her deliberately," Danjuma said, not a question. "It would appear so." "How long ago did they meet?" "The night of your engagement party." A long silence. "Withdraw the legal notice." "Sir?" "Withdraw it, today, and ensure our company's name is not attached to any further action regarding that warehouse." "Understood." When the lawyer left, Danjuma remained at his desk for a long time. He had spent years in business learning to read rooms, read people, read power. He had stood in an engagement hall and looked past a quiet man in simple clothes without a second thought. He was beginning to understand the cost of that inattention. The phone call from the law firm came on the 6th day of the 7-day deadline. Amara was reviewing a delivery manifest when Mullam Garba rushed into the back office holding his phone. "They withdrew it," he said. She looked up. "The legal notice. They called. Bello Integrated Holdings has decided not to pursue the matter." Amara set down her pen slowly. "Just like that?" she said. "Just like that." She picked up her phone and called Emeka. He answered on the second ring. "It's gone." "I know." "You know already?" "I received a message from their firm an hour ago." She leaned back in her chair. "What exactly did you put in that letter, Emeka?" "The truth, properly documented." "And your name at the bottom?" "And that." She was quiet for a moment.
Outside the office window, she could see her two drivers loading a truck with the calm efficiency that had become their standard. 2 months ago, this warehouse was empty. Now it had a rhythm, a reputation, a future. "Come by tonight," she said. "We should talk about what happens next. I'll bring food." "Don't bring food, just come." A brief pause. "All right." 3 days after the legal notice was withdrawn, Amara's phone rang. The name on the screen, Mama. She answered. "Amara." Her voice was different. The sharpness was gone. In its place was something Amara had heard only a handful of times in her life, her mother speaking from the soft part of herself that the practical part usually stood in front of. "I heard what happened with Danjuma's company and the warehouse." "Yes." A long pause. "People are saying things about your husband," her mother said carefully. "People say things about everyone. They are saying he is not a small man, Amara." She said nothing. "I misread the situation," Hajiata Ramatu said, and the words came out the way hard things do when they have been worked over for a long time before being spoken. "I chose the image of this family over my daughter. That was wrong." Amara closed her eyes. "I know you are still hurt. I am not calling to ask you to pretend otherwise. I am calling to say that I was wrong and that I see you." Outside, the evening call to prayer began from the mosque 2 streets away. The sound rose and settled over the neighborhood, familiar and steady as breathing. "Thank you, Mama," Amara said. "Will you come home sometime?" "Yes, soon." "Your sister also?" "Mama." "Yes." "One thing at a time." A pause. "Yes, all right. One thing at a time."
She called the following week. Amara answered. There was a long silence on the line before Zara spoke, and when she did, the usual sureness was gone, the quick laughter, the easy reframing. What remained was something smaller and therefore more real. "I don't have a speech," Zara said. "I've been writing one for weeks. They all sound wrong." "Then don't give one," Amara said. "I knew you would say that. Because it's the right answer." Another pause. "Are you happy, honestly?" Amara thought about the warehouse in the morning, before the drivers arrived, when she walked through it alone and felt the particular satisfaction of having built something from nothing. She thought about Emeka at their kitchen table, asking the one question that cut to the center of whatever problem she was circling. She thought about the balcony evenings and the tea and the way he laughed when she said something that surprised him. "Yes," she said, honestly. Zara was quiet for a moment. "I'm glad," she said, and it sounded for the first time in a long while like something she meant entirely. Danjuma. He did not call. There was no dramatic confrontation, no final speech, no moment in a boardroom where he faced consequences in front of witnesses. What happened was slower and quieter, and therefore more permanent. Over the weeks following the withdrawn legal notice, word moved through Kano's business circles about the manner in which the dispute had been resolved. People connected the story: the engagement scandal, the warehouse, the legal notice, the response letter, and the name at the bottom. The story acquired texture and detail as it traveled, and the texture was not favorable to Danjuma. He had used a legal threat to attack a woman running a legitimate small business. He had done it using the resources of a major company for what was clearly a personal reason. And he had been made to withdraw by a man whose operational network was larger than his, a man who had been standing near the doorway at his own engagement party, watching, wearing simple clothes, and whom Danjuma had not bothered to notice. Board members began asking questions about judgment.
Investors became slightly more careful with their phrasing. The large charity event he had organized lost 2 of its headline sponsors without clear explanation. He remained powerful. He was not destroyed, but the certainty that had surrounded him, the assumption that his version of events was always the final version, had developed a visible crack.
6 months after the warehouse opened, Amara and Emeka attended a formal business dinner at a hotel in Nasarawa GRA, an annual gathering of supply chain and logistics executives from across the northern states. Emeka had been invited as a keynote contributor. Amara had been invited because the host had heard about the Kofod Wambai operations client retention numbers and wanted to know more. She wore a simple but elegant deep green dress. Emeka wore a quality native outfit, his first appearance at a formal event as the person he actually was, rather than the person he had allowed others to assume he was. When they entered, the room shifted. Not the way it had shifted at Danjuma's engagement party. This time it shifted because people recognized the name and then looked for the face and found a woman standing with quiet confidence who looked entirely at home in her own skin. Halfway through the evening, Danjuma appeared. He had not known they would be there. She could tell from the brief, controlled pause in his stride when he saw them across the room. He recovered immediately and crossed the floor with the smooth ease of someone who had decided on his approach before he arrived. "Emeka," he said, extending his hand. "Good to see you." "Danjuma," Emeka replied. The handshake was brief. Then Danjuma turned to Amara. "Madamize? Mr. Bello?" They looked at each other. The room was full of people who were watching without appearing to watch. "I hope there are no difficulties between us," Danjuma said carefully. Amara held his gaze with complete steadiness. "The past always reveals exactly what it needs to." A very brief flicker crossed his face. "He wish you both well," he said. Emeka spoke before Amara could. "And we wish you clarity." The slight edge in the word was measured exactly. Danjuma nodded once and moved away. Later, walking to the car in the warm evening air, Amara took Emeka's arm. "You said clarity," she noted. "I thought it was accurate." "Not mercy? That would have been generous." She smiled, a full smile, the kind that had been rare for a long time and was now becoming ordinary again. "You're a complicated man," she said. "You knew that early on." "I did, and I married you anyway." He looked at her as they reached the car. "Yes," he said quietly, "you did." 1 year later. The warehouse near the Kofod Wambai had expanded twice. First to an adjacent space Malam Garba had been using for storage, then into a second unit on the same street. It now operated 12 delivery routes covering central and eastern Kano, with 23 active clients and a staff of 14. Amara had been invited to speak at a supply chain forum in Abuja, one of 12 speakers, the only woman and the one whose 20-minute presentation generated the most follow-up conversations. Emeka had been there. In the third row, not on the stage, not in the front row, not announcing himself to anyone. Watching, the way he had always watched, not to judge, but to see. Afterwards, at a quiet restaurant near the conference center, he placed a small envelope on the table beside her water glass. She opened it. Inside was a printed certificate of registration for a company with her name listed as a 50% shareholder. "What is this?" she asked. "A new entity. It will hold the warehouse operations and 3 new route contracts I've been in discussions about, under your management." She looked at him. "This was not discussed. I'm discussing it now." "Emeka." "You said equal," he said simply. "I'm making it legal." She looked at the certificate again, her name in clean black print beside his. "You didn't have to do this," she said. "I wanted to. There is a difference." She looked at him across the restaurant table. this man who had stood at the edge of a glittering engagement hall in simple clothes, who had given water to a woman the room was ignoring, who built an empire and then chosen to introduce himself as a farmer, who proposed on a low wall in the evening light and kept every word he had given her. "I used to think," she said quietly, "that being chosen by a wealthy man was how my life would change." He waited. "It changed because I refused to disappear, and because you opened a door. You walked through it yourself. With your direction, with your courage, those are not the same thing." She smiled, a full smile, the kind that had been rare for a long time and was now becoming ordinary again. Outside the restaurant window, Abuja moved through its evening rhythm. Cars and lights, in the particular energy of a city that never quite slows.
Amara folded the certificate carefully and placed it back in the envelope. "Thank you," she said. "You're welcome." They ordered food. They talked about the forum, about the new route contracts, about whether the left burner in their Bombay kitchen had finally been fixed. It had not. They talked about visiting her mother the following weekend, and about a supplier in Katsina who was proving difficult, and about nothing of consequence for 20 comfortable minutes. And life, which had once tried very hard to break her, continued moving forward in the ordinary, extraordinary way that it does when you decide, despite everything, to remain. Amara began with nothing but her dignity and her discipline. Her sister took the man she loved. Her family asked her to be silent. Her city expected her to disappear. She did none of those things. And the quiet man that no one thought to notice, he turned out to be exactly the kind of person this world pretends doesn't exist. Someone whose worth had nothing to do with what he showed you. If this story moved you, tell us in the comments. Did Amara lose everything, or did she escape everything? Would you have forgiven your sister? Was Danjuma cruel, or just cowardly? Like, share, and subscribe, because the next story is already waiting, and it is just as powerful as this one.